Hi, it's Erin here, and today I'm going to show you how to paint this quick and easy, but still quite pretty watercolor greeting card that any beginner watercolor artist can do. So I'm going to apologize because it's one of my first videos and I say and ah a little more than I should. So just ignore those. Enjoy the video and let's get painting. Before we start, let's go over the materials we'll be using. I've got Van Gogh tube watercolors in my palette, and we're going to be using two colors today, Quinacridone Rose and Oxide Black. For brushes, I've got two Princeton Snap round brushes, one in a size 6 and one in a size 2. And the paper that we're going to be using, or that I'm using, is Strathmore 400 series watercolor paper. And it's 140 pound, and it is not 100% cotton. So if you haven't invested in 100% cotton paper yet, you'll do just fine with a cellulose paper like this. It actually works probably better for this project because I'm going for a layered effect on the flowers, and I want it to dry fairly quickly, and cotton paper takes a lot longer to dry. So for this card, I've got an envelope that holds a 5x7 card. So I've cut the stock to 10x7, and I've scored it down the middle. I just used like a rotary tracing wheel that I have for tracing sewing patterns. I don't have an actual scoring tool, but there's inexpensive ones on the internet that you can order, and I'll put a link for one or more of those below in the description box. If you don't want to get one, that's fine. You can use something as long as it's dull, like the back end of a butter knife, as long as it's dull and it's not going to tear your paper. But it is a good idea to score it so you get a nice clean fold, okay? And I've also put down a strip of painter's tape down the middle, just so I have a visual of what I'm working with for the front of the card. And this is going to be a thank you card, so I've penciled in the words thank you, and I'll be inking those in after the card is done. So to begin, I've got my water jar and a paper towel handy. Now the number 2 brush I'm going to reserve just for the stems, so we don't need that quite yet. And I'm going to mix up a bit of the Quinacridone Rose. You don't need too much. Sorry, I should have spritzed my palette first. I like to do that usually. So we'll get a bit of that Quinacridone Rose. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Quinacridone Rose. So we'll just put a bit in one of my mixing wells here. Takes a little bit to get it activated. That should be good. I'm just going to rinse off my brush because I just want a little bit on the tip. So I'm going to take off the excess water, get some of the paint on my brush, and I think I'm going to start with a petal right about here. So I'm just going to put down some of the paint in a kind of a V shape. And then I'm going to rinse off my brush. I'm going to have just a little bit of water on the end, and then I'm going to just paint in with the water. I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but just in a rough petal shape. Okay, and then once you've done that, drag the water down to meet the paint, and that will activate that bleed up into the petal. Now keep in mind, some paints bleed a lot faster than others, some bleed a lot slower. So you can practice on some scrap paper that you have, just so you know what you're working with. I'm just going to drag, and you can drag the color up a bit just to nudge that bleed along. Now I want these petals fairly light, so I'm going to go back in. So I just want a little bit more at the bottom. There. So I'm going to go back in and just lighten this petal up a bit. So I'm going to clean my brush, take off the excess water so it's just damp, and then I'm just going to lightly drag my brush through to pick up some of that pigment. And you can just do this as much or as little as you want, depending on how light or dark you want your petals to be. I want them fairly light because I want to see the layered look when I lay the next petals on top of it. So I'm going to let that dry before we add a second petal, and I'm going to start with the next flower. So I think I'll put another one over here and do the same thing. Kind of a rough V shape. And then paint the petal in with the water and drag it down to hit the paint and start that bleed going. And then we'll do the same thing and lift some of that pigment up. Okay, so I'm going to continue this on until I have all my flowers in place. And I will start the bud, which is going to be right about here. Now the bud I want to be a little darker than the petals, because a bud, if you imagine, all the petals haven't expanded, so they're kind of hugging each other, so they will be denser, which will give them a darker color. So I'm not going to use too much water here because I don't want it to bleed out too much. And that should do the bud, a little pointy tip. Now I'm not going to lift that, like I say, because I do want it darker. So now we can go back to the other petals and add more to them. They should be fairly dry before you go and add the second and third petals on. So depending on your paper, it may dry faster than this paper, or it may take longer to dry. So just do some tests until you get the feel of how long it's going to take to dry. Okay, so I'm going to put, oops, that's too much water. I'm going to put one more petal on this side. Okay, now when I go back in with the water, because this isn't 100% cotton paper, the pigment tends to sit on top. So if I go back in and rework this other petal on top, if you work it too much, you can lift the pigment from underneath and that layered effect will go away. So when I lay the water down, I'm going to start on this side and go over the existing petal last. So just keep it to the left, and then at the last minute you can go over that existing petal. Don't work it too much because you don't want to lift it, and then hit that bleed. There we go. And if you want to drag it up, do it, but very lightly so you don't disturb that petal underneath. Okay. Same goes when you're doing the lifting. Do it gently when you're doing it over the original petal. Okay. Here we go. So just continue this on until you have as many petals as you want on each flower. I'm going to do one right onto the right of this one. And just spread the pigment around if it's not bleeding as much as you want. You can just kind of coax that bleed up. And again, lift it gently so you get that layered look. Okay. So play around with the bleeds, let the paint do its thing and see what you come up with. Okay, so I think that's it for the petals, and we can move on to the stems. Now, I want the stems to bleed into the flowers a little bit. So really the only area that's wet and that the stems would bleed into would be the last petal, because that's probably the only one that's still a little wet. So what I'm going to do is get some of the oxide black on my number 2 paintbrush, and it's fairly concentrated too, the pigment that I'm using, because I want to make sure that it's pretty rich. So now I want it to bleed into the base of each flower, so I'm just going to re-wet with just a little bit of watered down pigment, re-wet that bottom. Okay, so that area will be where the black will bleed into it. Now, I just want to quickly do this, so I'm just going to do all the bleeds first and then finish up with the stems. So I kind of want this one to curve down a bit, so I'm just going to kind of get the idea that it's going to come up to here, and that's where I want it to tap into. Okay, where I want that bleed to go. Now, if it's not bleeding as much as you would like, just wet your brush, a little bit of water, and just coax that up again. Okay? I don't want to go nuts with the bleeds. You don't want it to overtake your flower. but you want to be able to see that it's going in. Okay, so like before, we'll just take some of the rose pigment, reactivate this base, and go in with the oxide black. Just tap it, it'll bleed. There you go. And let it sit for a minute because it'll continue to bleed. There we go. Now for the bud, it's actually faded a little more than I would want, so I'm just going to put a little bit more in here and just lift off a little just to blend it out a bit. There. And again, I don't really want the black to bleed into the bud too much because I want it to look like the leaves are still encasing the bud. So I know it's fairly dry down there, and I'm just going to go in with the black and come up the sides to make it look like it's still kind of encased in the leaves. Okay. And I will feather it out just a little bit so it's not so harsh. There we go. Just like that. Okay, so now that that's done, we can, this just didn't bleed quite as much as I would like, so I'm just going to kind of work that up a bit. And then we'll get the stems in. Now when you do your stems, you just kind of look where you want the stem to go. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and I kind of want this one to come down and curve a bit. So I'm just going to just kind of eyeball. And as you do it, look at where you want it to go, and your hand will follow your eye. I'm not the best at doing stems. I'll be honest with you, they come out a little wobbly sometimes. So you don't want to just, you know, move your brush and go up like that because you'll get uneven pressure. You want to move your whole hand, either in an arc or just literally move your hand up the sheet. Okay, so I think I changed my mind. I'm going to start with this one here, and it's going to curve like this. It's going to hit this flower, and I want this flower to be in the foreground. So this is going to go from here to here first, and I'm going to stop it at that flower. Make sure if you do that on your card as well, that this is dry so the stem doesn't bleed into the flower. Okay, so I'm just going to have it go like this. So I'm just going to arc my hand to maintain even pressure. Okay, so now you have to eyeball where you think this would come out, and if this continued on, it would come out to about here. So right about here is where we're going to start this. So we're kind of doing it backwards because you want to make sure this lines up, and then we'll continue this on like so. Okay, this one is straightforward because it's not hitting any flowers, so I'll just arc this up, and like I say, just keep your eye on where it's going to end up. Okay, and arc your whole hand, and then the bud we'll do from here to here, and then this one. And then this one. This one's going to curve this way, so it's going to come down. I'll have it go down to about here. There, and then that would come down right about here. So I'll have this come out here and just follow this. Maintain that same curve. Okay. And there you are. There's your card, and I will just let that dry, and once it's dry, we'll go in and ink the lettering. Okay, actually I lied. I'm kind of not all that happy with what's going on here. This looks a little thick, so I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that this isn't dried too much and that I can still lift some up and thin that stem out, because it's just a little too thick for my liking. So you can do this as well. You just wet it and then tap a paper towel on it. Now keep in mind also that some pigments lift a lot easier than others, and some papers lift a lot easier than others. If this was on cotton paper, probably wouldn't lift so easy. But like I mentioned earlier, in the paper that's not 100% cotton, the pigment tends to sit on top, so it is a little easier to lift. Okay, so now that that's done and dry, we're going to ink in the lettering. So I'm using a Sharpie bleed-proof pen. We're not going over this in water, so it doesn't need to be bleed-proof. I just find that it doesn't feather as much on the paper. So just do some testing, find out, you know, what marker is going to give you the look that you want. Okay, I want a really fine line, and then one that doesn't bleed so it doesn't go all feathery. So I'm just going to go over the letters that I have written out in pencil. I'm not the best at hand lettering, but what I do will just will do the job. It's not the worst. And rather, just a tip on that, rather than try to complete the whole word, do one letter at a time and lift your hand. That way you're not risking making too many errors. You have a little more control that way. And just take your time. If you've seen any videos on hand lettering, it looks like they're going really fast. Chances are they've sped up the film, and that's not real time. So it does take time, and just go slow. Okay, so once that's dry, let that sit a bit and make sure it's completely dry. This marker I know dries fairly quickly, so I'm going to erase the pencil lines that I have. I prefer to use a Kneadable Eraser because it doesn't leave erasings all over your work, and also you can shape it to erase like fine areas rather than just going over the whole thing. They're also great if you're doing a lot of drawing that you're watercoloring and you want just a faint line. You can even just go in and just like lift it and it lightens the line. We want this whole line removed, so we're just gonna erase the whole thing. Now we're going to remove the tape. And there is your finished card. So my little confession is this. Once I saw how well it went lifting up the paint and fixing up that one wonky stem, I decided to sneak back in and rework a couple of the others that I wasn't happy with. So this is actually the finished card. I'm going to continue painting and make a few cards, maybe change up the color of the flowers, and I've decided that I'm going to make them blank so I can just write in whatever lettering I want as I need a card, if it's for a birthday or anniversary or whatever. I hope you will try this on your own and make a few cards. And if you're on Instagram, I would love to see your work. So post them on Instagram and tag me so I'm sure to find them. My Instagram account is in the description box below. So I hope you got some good tips and information out of this tutorial. And if you are interested in seeing some more very beginner friendly tutorials and learning a little more about watercolor, I will be posting probably 2 videos a week to start. So please subscribe. I would love to have you back and join my channel for some more videos. And if you do subscribe, please hit the notification button, because I don't have set days that I'll be posting on quite yet. And that way you'll be sure to be notified when I have new videos up. So that's it for now, guys. Take care, and I hope to see you soon, and have a great day. Bye.